Hi, everybody. This is Diane Yantel. Thanks for joining today's call on coronavirus and housing and homelessness. As always, we have a large number of people joining the call, so I'm going to give it another minute or so to allow people time to join before we start the agenda. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining today's call. This is Diane Yantel, and you have joined today's national call on coronavirus, housing, and homelessness. So thank you for joining today. I am glad to have so many people continuing to join these calls week after week. The urgency of our collective work and our advocacy only increases every day. And I really do want to just underscore the urgency of this work and the fact that we are running out of time to prevent a huge increase in evictions and homelessness. I know you all are living and breathing this every day and doing all that you can to prevent that outcome. But I just want to share a few numbers for you to keep in mind over the next couple of weeks during your advocacy, during your work. The federal eviction moratoriums, as limited as they are, have provided some protections for about 30% of renters across the country, and those moratoriums expire in 11 days. And the expanded unemployment insurance that has allowed some low-income renters to be able to pay their rent, that expires in 15 days. 29 governors have allowed their statewide eviction moratoriums to expire, and landlords and courts are already evicting and putting people out of their homes in places where COVID-19 is surging. From Tucson, Arizona, where courts are evicting 52 families every day, to Harris County, Texas, that has one of the biggest coronavirus surges in the country, where over 2,200 eviction cases are scheduled in the coming days and weeks. So according to our latest tracking, which you heard about on last week's call, there's about 150 new local rental assistance programs around the country that are preventing some evictions. And that's thanks in large part to the tremendous advocacy of everyone on this call, both in first getting the funds passed by Congress in the CARES Act, and then by urging your governors and your state legislatures to put those funds towards essential rental assistance. But many of these programs are shutting down within hours, in the case of Houston, or days after the funds are depleted. And the demand is overwhelming resources throughout the country. And we all know that without a quick and significant federal intervention, there will be a spike in evictions and an increase in homelessness across the country. And every day of inaction is putting more low-income renters at immediate risk of losing their home. And we are running out of time. And I think this is the most important thing for everybody to understand right now. And that is that the Senate returns to DC next week. And at that point, they'll have 10 legislative working days to negotiate, write, and enact a final spending bill before leaving for another recess and the start in earnest of election season. And at that point, after this next emergency spending bill, there won't be any other consequential bills enacted at least through mid-November and maybe through the rest of the year. The most Congress will do is some extensions of federal spending, but there won't be any consequential bills. And by then, by mid-November or by early next year, if Congress hasn't provided some form of rent relief, there will be millions of families that have been evicted and become homeless. So this is literally our last chance to stem the tide of evictions. So I just want to urge you all to do all you can in the next few weeks to demand that Congress provide rent relief. If your member of Congress is already supporting calls for rent relief, thank them, do it publicly via social media. If your member of Congress isn't supporting these solutions, demand a reason why not. Ask them what they're doing to stem the tide of evictions and do it publicly. Tag your member of Congress on Twitter and use every opportunity over the next few weeks to make the case. Tomorrow, NLIHC is publishing our annual Out of Reach report. So use the data, use the findings to push Congress on emergency housing solutions. Next week, we're planning for a virtual lobby day. Start preparing now to participate. And you'll hear later in this call more details on all of those opportunities and latest updates from Capitol Hill, what we're hearing, what's happening now. But for now, I just want to thank you again for all that you're doing and all that you've done over the last few months to protect people experiencing homelessness, to keep low-income renters stably housed. And I want to urge you to continue advocating and really to give it all you've got over these next essential few weeks. So I will turn now to our agenda. We have a number of important speakers on today. I want to thank you for sending questions already that I will plan to ask throughout the conversation with our speakers. If you have questions as you hear people speak, please go ahead and submit them via the Q&A box. And as time permits, I'll ask as many of the questions during the call as I can. And if we're not able to get to all of the calls, we'll coordinate with speakers afterwards and work to get everybody's questions answered one way or another. So I'm going to turn now to our first speaker, and that is Hunter Kurtz, who is the Assistant Secretary for Public and Indian Housing at HUD. And Assistant Secretary Kurtz is on today to talk about some of the new materials and guidance that Public and Indian Housing have put out to prevent evictions in public housing and some other things as well. So Assistant Secretary Kurtz, I really appreciate you taking the time to join today's call, and I'll turn it over to you now for some remarks.
Great, thank you, and thank you for having me. It's great to be back to update you on some of the work that we've done in the Office of Public and Indian Housing. But before I do that, I know I said this last time when I spoke to you all, and I just want to reiterate it. Thank you all for everything everyone's doing out there. The work we do at any time is incredibly important, but the work that we're doing right now has never been more important. Providing somebody with a safe and decent place to live, an affordable place to live, is one of the easiest ways to combat the coronavirus. So I thank you for your hard work and dedication. I know we're all, we've all been impacted by it in many ways, whether it's just, having to work from home or having friends or family, or even some of us who may have been directly impacted by the virus. So I just want to, thank you for your dedication and work on this. So since the last time I was here speaking with you all, we had sort of three major things that have happened. The first is, we put out our first ever waiver notice. This is something we've not ever had the opportunity to do in the past. It's sort of this broad blanket waiver. So we put one out a couple months ago, knowing that we were going to miss things, since we had never had an opportunity like this before. We took advice from a number of different organizations, including your own, and I want to thank you for that advice. We put the waiver notice out a little over a week ago, and I think one of the things we did, it specifically took from conversations with the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, is that we're requiring public housing authorities to post what waivers they choose to use. And this is, I think this is important for you all as well as us to see what we're doing that's working, what we're not. We also included a couple additional extra waivers on things sort of expanding some of the deadlines, expanding some of the waivers for some of the various programs like the FSS program and things like that. But I just again want to thank you for your input that we received before. Additionally, we began releasing some of our Indian Community Development Block Grant funding. That's $100 million that we have been awarding. As we're reviewing the applications, we're awarding them in a rolling basis so we can get the funding out there as quickly as possible. A couple weeks ago, we began awarding that funding, and we will continue to until we run out of the $100 million. We just wanted to get that on the street rather than waiting until we had the full, the full slate of grantees. We just wanted to get it out as quickly as possible. And finally, as you mentioned, with the moratorium on evictions coming to an end, we've put out a bunch of toolkit with a bunch of information on how public housing authorities can work with the residents to put together repayment plans and other ways that they can try to assist residents in public housing to ensure that they're not evicted because of hardships related to COVID. We're unable to expand the deadline. It's something Congress has to do. So when this deadline approaches, it will end. And we are, hopefully these toolkits and this other information that we've distributed will assist in ensuring that we don't see, mass evictions, and that people have the ability to help or have the ability to repay the back rent and ensure that they still have a place to live. So that is sort of the three main things we've been working on since the last time I got to speak with you all. And so that's, I guess, my presentation. But again, thank you for all of your hard work and dedication.
Great, thank you, Hunter. I appreciate it. And yes, appreciate you coming back again. Always appreciate having you and other leaders from HUD join to share updates and answer questions. And I want to ask a couple questions about the eviction prevention toolkit.
Sure.
We do really appreciate it having been published, and there's some good stuff in there, including, as you mentioned, a number of issues that we and other advocates have been urging PIH to address. So appreciate you addressing those. And also want to continue to urge you to go further where possible. So, for example, in the toolkit, you are encouraging PHAs to enter into repayment agreements so that tenants who are having difficulty paying their rent could have a reasonable period of time to repay. And I'd like to ask if PIH will instead require the PHAs to have these repayment agreements, and also urge that these repayment agreements include that the rent burden shouldn't exceed a percentage, 35 to 40% of the adjusted income.
Unfortunately, I don't think we have the authority to require public housing authorities to mandate a repayment agreement. So that's why we put together these toolkits and continue to encourage them to use these tools and documentation.
Okay, I do think you have more authority than you're utilizing with making so many suggestions, but not requirements.
We did take a look at it, but I'll take a look at it again.
Okay, and similarly, you're encouraging the PHAs to have interim income recertifications that allow for retroactive adjustments to rents, which again, I think is important, and I'm glad to see you putting that out there and encouraging the PHAs to do so. But one, a lot of tenants are not aware, despite our best efforts and the best efforts of others, a lot of tenants aren't aware of the opportunity that they have to request that recertification. So we think that you should require the PHAs to inform tenants through a variety of means, but to actively inform the tenants that they have the ability to recertify their incomes and their rents.
That's a really interesting point. Let me look into that, because I agree with you. You know, that's why one of the reasons we were really excited about your proposal about posting the waivers that they're using. Let's take a look at that.
Okay, great. Thank you. And just a couple more suggestions and questions. And one is that also on the recertifications, I think there's a lot of reasons why tenants might not be able to request the recertification right now during the pandemic. Lots of reasons that might be impacting their ability. Also, the PHAs might have staff limitations during the pandemic. So would like to suggest that you also require the PHAs to have recertification policies that include retroactive adjustments to the date when the tenant's income decreased.
Okay, we take a look at it. I'm not sure we can, but I'm happy to look into it.
Okay, and then similarly, and I think the answer may be similar as well, but another important part of the guidance is how you are reminding the PHAs of their obligation to grant an exemption to the minimum rent, and that hardship exemptions have to be granted if a household would otherwise be evicted. And again, we believe that you should consider requiring the PHAs to use a $0 minimum rent during the pandemic, and to require that the PHA staff inform residents of their right to request a hardship exemption. I think those requirements of PIH requiring PHAs to inform residents both of their right to request a hardship exemption and their right to have their rents recertified is certainly within the authority of HUD and of you as Assistant Secretary.
Okay, I'll definitely take a look at this.
All right, great. And I'll be happy to send those to you in writing afterwards if it's helpful for your consideration. There's one more question that's come in that says that tenants can't pay back rent without a steady and ongoing source of income, having lost their jobs, and without extending the moratorium, tenants will be evicted, and asking what are your ideas for a solution. And I think maybe to add on to that, to ask if you all have discussed or considered ways that you might extend the eviction moratorium in the absence of congressional action or during the period of time when the eviction moratorium expires and before Congress acts.
Yeah, we unfortunately don't have the authority to extend the moratorium. It is something we looked into, but our lawyers are very clear that is not an authority that we have. So that was sort of the genesis for putting out this toolkit, was the hope that this would help public housing authorities see that, that you don't just have to evict someone, that there are a number of other solutions and tools that they can use to try to assist someone who's facing a income loss because of the effect of COVID.
Okay, and so is Secretary Carson urging Congress to extend that eviction moratorium?
I am not sure if we have taken an official stance on that.
Okay, so maybe that's something you can let me know afterwards, and we can let participants know what the stance is. Okay, great. Well, it looks like we don't have any other questions that have come in from participants, and those are my questions for now. So, Assistant Secretary Kurtz, again, I appreciate you working with us and taking our feedback, some of our feedback, and including it in the materials you put out, and look forward to continuing to work with you and urge you to go further. And I really appreciate you taking the time to be on today's call.
Always happy to speak with you all. And again, thank you for everything everyone's doing, and thank you for having me on.
Great, thank you. Take care.
You as well.
Okay, so next on our agenda is Director Mark Calabria, but he will be joining the call not quite yet. And so I'm going to go next to our speaker from California. Sasha Wasatsky-Kurgan, I hope I pronounced that correctly, please correct me if I didn't, who is the Data and Research Unit Chief for Housing Policy at the California Department of Housing and Community Development. And Sasha is on to talk a little bit about their efforts to provide permanent housing solutions for people experiencing homelessness. So Sasha, thanks so much for joining. I'll turn it over to you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And you said my name perfectly. Thank you.
Oh, good.
So good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me today. It really is wonderful to see all of you on the call virtually and to hear from all of you. Today, I'll talk about part of California's COVID-19 recovery, specifically, as it states here, providing permanent housing solutions for people experiencing homelessness after the pandemic. So going back, addressing California's ongoing homelessness crisis was already a top priority before the coronavirus pandemic arrived earlier this year, as outlined in Governor Newsom's State of the State address in February. Working to respond to and prevent homelessness becomes even more critical given the health consequences of COVID-19. Now, as many of you have heard and followed, our state responded to COVID-19 on several fronts, including Project Homekey, which created more than 15,000 emergency and non-congregate shelter accommodations for vulnerable Californians in more than 50 counties of our state. So now looking more towards long-term recovery and to grow that effort with interdepartmental partnerships of state and local agencies, our next step is Project Homekey. The governor's budget includes federal and state dollars for the creation of this project. That's $550 million of coronavirus relief funds and $50 million of general fund allocation. The budget calls out these funds as grants to local agencies. And that definition in our state includes cities, counties, housing authorities, and tribes. The budget also outlines several allowable uses of these funds. I'll go through them quickly. Acquisition or rehab of motels, hotels, or hostels, master leasing of properties, acquisition of other sites and assets, conversions of units from non-residential to residential, the purchase of affordability covenants or other restrictions, relocation costs. The budget also includes a line for operating subsidies for projects using these funds, which is actually a tie-out to the $50 million general fund, which has a longer period for allocation than the coronavirus relief funds. Last, the budget also addresses technical components of counting these homes towards local planning goals, permitting, and other review timelines that will certainly be important to the applicants. That's what the budget covers. And as a result of this budget authorization, we're currently drafting a Notice of Funding Availability, or NOFA, to release this month. So there are details of the program, which unfortunately I cannot share today, but the NOFA will outline priorities, considerations, and requirements for applicants. However, to inform the NOFA, we released a preliminary survey to local agencies. And I want to express a lot of appreciation for the rapid response and also the excitement as those survey responses demonstrated that there is a lot of activity locally and a lot of interest. We've had some very preliminary calls with jurisdictions who've presented a range of needs, opportunities, and an intense commitment to find interim and permanent housing solutions. And as we all know, hotel and motel conversions are not new to our development partners, and there are case studies from around the nation that can inform this work and how to do it quickly. But still, given that these funds have very tight expenditure deadlines, our commitment to partnership with locals and seeing successful investments requires that we consider and offer intensive technical assistance. We have a few things in mind for this type of TA. That includes, from my own department that I work at, the Department of Housing and Community Development, we can offer support on how applicants can think about funding considerations from federal, state, local, and philanthropic sources. We have a team that's focused on land use and planning. They can offer strategic direction on how to approach that. Further, we've collected a lot of data to inform site level analysis, neighborhood amenities, and we can offer data, analysis, and support when applicants may need a lift there. We are also really grateful for the partnership that we have with HUD, who is thinking with us about how to braid funding and strategically combine CARES funding with other sources for operating and capital needs. And then very importantly, we have a strong partnership with our Department of General Services, who also deployed for Project Homekey. And in Project Homekey, they can support us on, and applicants, on a range of activities, everything from site identification, walking with folks through negotiation, considering rehab scenarios, and more. Those are some of our preliminary ideas, but we also look forward to hearing from applicants on what they need to see how we might be able to support them. I'll close just by saying that in this moment, we're so pleased to already see California jurisdictions and other states considering strategies like this, and look forward to continuing to build the community of practice. We need to move really fast to get these funds spent to support housing solutions locally, to meet the spending deadline, and more importantly, to address the huge need for housing to support people that are experiencing homelessness and are at risk of homelessness. We look forward to working in partnership with local agencies, and also thank you for this time today. We look forward to checking back in with you and with other partners around the nation as you contemplate these types of opportunities. That's all I have for the day. Please let me know if you have any questions. If I can't answer them today, we do have a dedicated email address that I'll share with National Low Income Housing Coalition.
Thank you, Sasha, so much for joining and for sharing that. We do have some questions. One that's coming from a few people is really easy, I think, which is asking you to provide the web links to the project home budgets, the priorities, the time frame for implementation, and the link that people can check for the coming NOFA.
Great. Yes, that is easy. So part of it is easy, part of it is forthcoming. For the bill, I can say it right now, and then I can put it in the chat, and if the organizers can share it with everyone. It is Assembly Bill 83, which passed to implement the budget and the housing provisions, which I spoke about. Anyone can sign up for HCD's mailing address, or sorry, our email list, which will certainly announce Project Homekey. We're trying to streamline communication on this as much as possible. We will broadly announce the launch of the NOFA on our website to our email distribution list. And we will wrap back around with NLIHC once we have it live, and we would love for you to amplify it as well.
Okay, yeah, certainly we'll share it out as soon as we have it. So please do send it. Also, some questions about how and whether the public will be able to track where the grant money is being allocated. Are you going to make announcements after you've made decisions?
Yeah, that's typically how we will work in any of our grant or loan programs, is that we would announce awards. And we look forward to doing that. We are candidly standing up the most critical items first, but we are thinking about how to let everyone know about the successes and the progress of this program. So I don't have a firm answer today, but I do know we will be sharing details as we make awards.
Okay, and did you say that nonprofits are not eligible for funding?
They are not listed. So just what I can offer today is a plain reading of Section 21 in the bill, which includes local agencies as recipients of the grant funds. And then I'll pause there just to say that we certainly acknowledge that local agencies will be looking to partner, and we will define what partnership might look like in our NOFA, and how a local agency could demonstrate that partnership. So we are certainly thinking about nonprofits and for-profits having a role here, but we will spell out the details of that in the NOFA. The NOFA functions as our guidelines, if you will, for the program. So it's where we will clarify things like that and any other questions that we know might be coming up.
Okay, all right, thank you. And there's a suggestion that just as you plan to share accomplishments that you also consider sharing the challenges that you're likely to face in this program, since other communities can learn from those challenges.
Absolutely.
Can you tell us what the spending deadline will be?
Yes, our understanding of the Coronavirus Relief Fund spending deadline is December 30th, 2020, to spend monies by that date. So that's the $550 million. The general fund allocation has a 2-year expenditure deadline from the budget date. So that will kick out to June 30th of 2022. With those expenditure deadlines, both of them, but certainly the one that's this year, you can see why we will be prioritizing expediency and readiness, because it is a very aggressive deadline.
Yeah. Okay. And then we do have quite a few more questions that have come in, but we only have time for one more. So one, I'd ask that I can connect with you afterwards to get additional questions answered and share that back out with participants in follow-up emails. But I'll ask you one last question, which is if you can speak to, broadly speak to some of the successes and the challenges with Project Homekey, what you feel like some of the most important lessons learned have been that others can consider as they're looking to house people experiencing homelessness who are unsheltered in hotels.
Wow, that's great. And I work in partnership with some of our other friends at the Department of Social Services and the Homeless Coordinating Financing Council and the Department of General Services, who've been lead on implementing that in support of the governor's initiative. But I think, so I won't try to speak for them. I think it might be a good follow-up where we can really share some of those lessons learned in detail. But just even in the groups that I've highlighted, you can see that this is not just one department which is pulling this off. And that's just from the state level. Locally, there's departments of general services and COCs and housing departments and planners and emergency services all working together and quickly. So at the state, one thing that we've tried to do is to create document templates which might be useful for folks who are negotiating leases, and to be able to share those to kind of decrease some of the time and the pain points that might happen if everybody's trying to come up with the same documents individually. So we'll be taking some of those lessons as we move into Project Homekey as well, kind of removing duplication of efforts to the extent that we can. Some of the challenges, there's a readiness component. We have seen jurisdictions that have welcomed the opportunities. We've seen other jurisdictions which have not. Sometimes at the very same location, there have been people expressing support and disappointment. So those are just some of the high-level takeaways that I'd share. But one of the successes is so quickly being able to bring people inside, and that has been just a fantastic response that has required all of this coordination to get it done.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Sasha. I really appreciate you joining and sharing this, and do send us any relevant links, and we'll be glad to share that out as email follow-up to all participants on this call. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Diane. Thanks.
Okay, bye-bye. Okay, I believe our next caller is on. No, it looks like we're having some technical difficulties there. Okay, so we're having some technical difficulties getting Director Calabria on, but he will be on soon. So I think actually maybe I will turn to Kim Johnson from NLIHC. Kim, if you're ready and you could jump ahead on the agenda to share updates on state and local implementation, that would be helpful.
No problem, happy to.
Great.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kim Johnson, and I'm a policy analyst here at the National Low Income Housing Coalition. I co-lead our state and local implementation working group calls on Wednesdays at 3 p.m. Eastern with my colleagues Tori Bure and Ed Gramlich. So these calls are a great opportunity for us to do a deeper dive into some of the issues around COVID-19, and in particular CARES Act funding distribution and implementation of CARES Act programs. They're also a time for us to hear from advocates and service providers about the issues and successes they're experiencing on the ground, which in turn helps us shape our advocacy on the Hill. We invite speakers to share lessons learned and best practices for using CARES Act funding, and to address the needs of people experiencing homelessness, as well as low-income and historically marginalized communities. So, like Diane said at the opening, one of the most pressing issues facing state and local communities is the end of the eviction moratoria and the impending wave of evictions that will likely follow if the moratoria are allowed to expire and communities don't receive the funding that they need to ensure that people can remain in their homes. FHFA announced on June 17th that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac would extend their moratorium on evictions and foreclosures for single-family homes with an FHFA-backed mortgage until August 31st, but they have yet to announce an extension for multifamily properties. We're working with our colleagues at the National Housing Law Project to urge FHFA to extend the moratorium for multifamily properties as well.
Hey, Kim.
Yes.
That's a great segue to FHFA director who is now on. So I'm going to ask you to pause. I'm going to pause you there, Kim. Thank you. We'll come back to you in a bit. And I'm going to turn now back to our agenda. And we have on the line now Dr. Mark Calabria, who is the Director of Federal Housing Finance Agency, or FHFA. And Director Calabria joins us today, as he has in the past, to share updates from the agency about latest efforts to protect renters in federally backed properties from eviction. So Mark, thank you for joining us again, and I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Diane, for that introduction. And thank you for inviting me to join today's call. I know it's been since April, I believe, that I last spoke with you, and I know Maria Fernandez on my team also spoke to you in March. So I think it's helpful today to give you an update on what we've been doing since then. And let me really emphasize that since day one, back in March, we were focused at FHFA in making sure that we could keep renters and borrowers safe in their homes so that we could facilitate appropriate social distancing during this national health emergency. In fact, I can't think of another federal agency that acted before FHFA to help households financially impacted by the virus. While we've done a lot on the single family side, I'm going to focus my remarks today on what we've done on the multifamily side, because I know that this is a topic of particular interest to listeners, and also recognize that this is a crisis where, particularly on the employment side, that renters have been disproportionately impacted relative to homeowners. With that said, I think maybe it's useful before we talk about what we've done to give you a little bit of background on the mechanics of how FHFA interacts and can support with multifamily tenants. The first really important point to understand is that FHFA's jurisdiction only covers those mortgages owned or guaranteed by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And so while, of course, that's about 43% of the multifamily market, representing about 8.5 million households, but obviously we don't have a relationship of coverage of non-Fannie and Freddie mortgages. It's also important to keep in mind, as I mentioned back in April on the call, we at FHFA do not have a direct relationship with the tenants who live in the multifamily properties. It is importantly, neither do Fannie and Freddie. Fannie and Freddie have contractual relationship with the mortgage lenders and the servicers with whom they do business. And those mortgage companies have contractual relationships with the multifamily property owners who then have contractual relationships with the tenants. So it's just important to keep in mind that we at FHFA are multiple levels removed away from renters. That said, we thought it was important very early in the crisis, given particularly this disproportionate impact on renters, to figure out what we could do to assist renters. And of course, requiring mortgage companies to adopt certain policies as a condition of doing business with Fannie and Freddie is also an important part of this. And while Fannie and Freddie can extend those policies to the servicers can extend those policies to the multifamily borrowers. But we are bound somewhat to the extent that the original terms of the mortgage and the modifications that can be made. So our first way that we address this, even pre-CARES Act, was to create a forbearance program so that, again, multifamily borrowers could get forbearance on their loans and essentially pass along that benefit to the tenants during that time. and the multifamily borrower would work with the mortgage servicer to set up a repayment plan or modification that would be needed. We, of course, anticipated that this relief would be able to help both the borrowers in terms of the landlord as well as the tenants. We've also, to make sure that, again, that the multifamily property owners and borrowers were passing along that benefit, for those borrowers to be able to enter forbearance, part of the requirement was to suspend any tenant evictions for non-payment of rent during that time. To put this in perspective in terms of footprint, we've estimated that about 170,000 multifamily units in properties receiving forbearance or in properties receiving forbearance with a Fannie and Freddie backed mortgage. And we believe this prohibition is in effect for as long as the property owner is in forbearance. Originally, the multifamily forbearance option, both in what we set up and what was codified in the CARES Act, was for 3 months. We announced in late June that we are extending that an additional 3 months. And I think it also allows us to be able to put some additional requirements on there when property owners enter into a new forbearance program. But again, I do want to emphasize that our policies are binding on property owners only if they are written to the terms of the original mortgage contract or a loan modification such as a forbearance agreement. So this means that our eviction moratorium applies only to those multifamily property owners who enter forbearance. If the loan is performing and the property owner does not enter forbearance, we at FHFA do not have the authority or ability to impose new restrictions on landlords. Likewise, FHFA's policies only apply to renters living in multifamily properties with a mortgage backed by Fannie and Freddie. That said, as everyone knows, the CARES Act created its own eviction moratorium. It applies for 120 days from enactment, even if the property owner is not in forbearance, and it covers renters living in multifamily properties with a mortgage backed by the enterprises or any other federal entity. As everyone on the call is, I'm sure, aware, the CARES Act eviction moratorium expires in less than 2 weeks on July 25th. FHFA has been working with the enterprises to find ways to support renters after that expiration date. As I mentioned, one step we took in June was to offer a 3-month extension to multifamily property owners already in forbearance. This extension is subject to the same payment-related eviction moratorium that we put in place in March. Under this extension, there are also several new tenant protection policies that apply to property owners who extend their forbearance, enter a new forbearance agreement, or modify the repayment plan of their loan. Some of these protections were provided in the CARES Act, and we've made sure that those covered multifamily properties would continue to have these, such as, for instance, property owners must suspend tenant evictions for the non-payment of rent during the entire forbearance period. They must provide a 30-day notice to vacate throughout their repayment period, which could be up to 24 months. And the landlords are prohibited from charging tenants late fees or penalties for the non-payment of rents during the forbearance or repayment periods. And they must allow tenants the flexibility to repay rent over time, not requiring a lump sum at the end of the forbearance period. As I said, FHFA's policies do not apply to the entire multifamily market. We are hopeful, of course, that others in the multifamily market will see these as useful standards and embrace them themselves. And let me really emphasize, it is our position that landlords and property owners should not charge tenants penalties or late fees for non-payment of rent during the national emergency. We also think that tenants should be able to be released from their lease without penalty if the tenant is unable to pay. We also think the tenant should be able to pay back on a flexible schedule, not in a lump sum. And in cases where eviction is necessary, unfortunately, we believe that property owners should provide at least 30 days notice to vacate the property safely. We continue to work with the enterprises to monitor multifamily forbearance programs. We want to ensure that multifamily owners are receiving the support they need, and tenants facing a COVID-related financial hardship can remain safely housed. This is especially important for small balance loans in seniors housing. These are at greater risk of financial hardship and have higher rates of forbearance. In addition to the 3-month forbearance extension, FHFA is working to ensure renters have access to accurate and up-to-date information about their options. When we last spoke in April, I told you that FHFA had directed the enterprises to develop their own publicly available lookup tools. And in May, those tools for multifamily went live, and I hope they have been useful to everyone. These online searchable databases allow renters to determine whether they are living in an enterprise that is Fannie or Freddie-backed multifamily property. These lookup tools also direct tenants to renter helplines where they can call for assistance. This includes free financial counseling for tenants struggling to pay rent. Fannie and Freddie are offering these case management services to tenants for the first time ever. Any renter who feels unable to exercise their rights should contact directly Fannie and Freddie. There are a few ways to find these renter assistance helplines. For instance, I would encourage you to direct tenants to fhfa.gov/coronavirus. This is FHFA's website that centralizes resources for renters and landlords. I would also direct you to cfpb.gov/housing. This is a one-stop shop website for COVID-related housing resources that FHA, CFPB, and FHA work to create together. And you can also visit the enterprise's own websites, Fannie Mae's KnowYourOptions.com, as well as Freddie Mac's myhome.freddiemac.com. And of course, both enterprises maintain helplines that can be called directly. And as I said in April, I want to thank Diane and the National Low-Income Housing Coalition for developing your own searchable database and map. Combining that data on enterprises and all federally backed mortgages has been a great public service. Speaking of public service, I know that many housing advocacy organizations and others on this call have been working nonstop, going above and beyond the call of duty. So I do want to recognize and thank you for all of your hard work. And want you to know that FHFA will continue to work with Fannie and Freddie to ensure that renters can access the information they need to know what their relief options are. For example, Freddie's lookup tool includes 16,000 single-family rental homes, and Fannie is working to include its lookup tool 7,000 single-family rental homes. These are mostly investor-owned rental homes, the larger investors that we often hear about. These single-family rental homes, again, institutional investors. Therefore, they don't raise the same sort of privacy concerns that we're working on smaller landlords. But I really do want to thank you for the work you've done and say I'm very proud of the steps that FHFA has taken to support renters during this crisis. And we'll also mention we continue to do our normal work. I will mention quickly, because I know it'll be of interest to some on the call, that we will soon be proposing the enterprise's affordable housing goals, as well as the duty to serve program requirements for 2021 and beyond. And while we continue to work through this COVID crisis, I'm grateful for the stakeholders on this call. It's important that we hear feedback, and it's important that we get some, hear what you're hearing from tenants and those out there outside of the Beltway. So with that, Diane, I apologize if I've gone a little over, and I apologize for some technical difficulties on the front end, but look forward to trying to answer whatever questions you may have.
No apology needed, Mark. Thank you for joining, and that was really helpful. I appreciate all the useful information you shared, and I really appreciate your leadership. And I just want to agree with what you said at the beginning of your remarks, which is that I think there's no doubt that you and FHFA acted first when coronavirus came to this country, acted first to do what you can to protect renters. And I believe that your leadership in what I think was an unprecedented move to extend the foreclosure protections and the forbearance allowances to also tie to that protections for renters from evictions, I think that paved the way for the CARES Act to go further with its eviction protection. So I appreciate your leadership. And I want to ask about, you mentioned the databases that both NLIHC and FHFA have created to allow renters to know whether their properties are covered under the CARES Act and whether they are protected from evictions. And as you know, we have been pushing you and FHFA and urging you all along to make available the data that's not included in either of our databases, which are the 1 to 4 properties and the single family homes. And I'm glad to hear you say that it sounds like Freddie does now have 16,000 of those properties in its database, and I believe you said Fannie will soon have 7,000 properties in its database. So I'd love to hear you say more about when that will be available in Fannie's, and also, as you mentioned, that's still not the full universe of the single family properties that are protected. So when will those data be made available?
Thank you, Diane. I appreciate the kind words, and I appreciate the recognition. As you mentioned, the multifamily forbearance program was something that was never done before, and so while I really do understand the frustration often getting these things set up, I do appreciate everyone's understanding that we were essentially driving the car while we were building it at the same time, and it did result, unfortunately, a few bumps in the road here and there. So to maybe kind of draw this in comparison to some of the things we're working at, we have found on the multifamily, or maybe I should answer directly the two timing. So for institutional investors that own significant amount of rental properties, that data should be up. If it's not up there now, it'll be very soon. So we've gotten that through the process. We're still trying to make sure that we've got property matches. So maybe to give you some sense of some of the bumps we've run into the road, on the single family side, where if you are a owner of the house and you have a mortgage, you go to the lookup tool and we link you by your social security number, which is obviously unique to every individual. In that way, we don't run into a lot of problems with, how you spell out street or avenue, things like that. And so obviously I'm assuming in the overall majority of cases, a tenant's not going to have the social security number of their landlord. So we're trying to make sure that we've actually got a database that will link you with an answer. And unfortunately, it's been a little harder cleaning that up and coming up with a functional database than we wanted. We've also got Privacy Act restrictions on that. We can't put information out that would allow you to find out somebody's mortgage information for an individual property owner, which is why we were able to get out the institutional investors quickly. So we are trying to work toward a solution that gets us compliant with the Privacy Act, that has a database that actually does link up, given that we don't have a unique identifier like social security number. So I would say, unfortunately, the process has been a little more complicated than I expected it to be on the front end, but we're continuing to work through on that. And really, the institutional ones, investors, those should be up. If not now, they should be up very shortly.
Well, good. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you. And we'll be looking out for it. I think those, as we've discussed at length before, those institutional investors, that property information is in many ways the most important, because unfortunately some of the tenants in those properties are the most vulnerable to illegal evictions moving forward. So I'm glad to hear that that will be made public. And on the topic of illegal evictions, we talked about that the last time you were on as well. And just, in some ways it seems that some of the illegal evictions attempted despite the CARES Act have increased in recent weeks. And so wondering what you can do to ensure, what will you do if you learn of a property owner that is covered by the CARES Act, that is FHFA insured, that is attempting to illegally evict renters?
So this is kind of, well, first of all, let me say, if you're a tenant or you're working on behalf of a tenant and you believe that is the case, you should either, and again, I'll make sure you have the phone numbers and the contact, should either directly contact Fannie and Freddie. And we've done this in the instance. So for instance, I know there was a big ProPublica report, and Fannie and Freddie went back, looked at the properties, contacted the borrowers. So we don't have a lot of tools in our end to identify when this is happening, but if others identify when they believe it's happening, we can investigate and dig into it. I would also say it's certainly worthwhile contacting CFPB, and while they don't have any statutory authority over property owners, they do have a pre-existing relationship with state attorney generals and other consumer enforcement. I mean, ultimately, the enforcement for this that Congress has structured, really is at the state and local level, but either through CFPB or through us working through Fannie and Freddie. Even working through Fannie and Freddie, we don't have criminal penalties. So but what we can do, and this falls into two different buckets. If the borrower, multifamily property owner, landlord, all that is in a forbearance program, and they're illegally evicting, we can either demand that is a violation of the forbearance agreement. That's a violation of loan agreements. So we have some pressure we can put on them. Otherwise, the only pressure if they fall into the latter category, I guess this is more the 40-24 category, where it's just a broad base on the property. Our enforcement tools are really what's in the loan document. And so all we can do in a 40-24 case is really just encourage them, reach out and say, we encourage you to follow the law. Because even the worst we can ever do is just find a loan and breach. So I really would emphasize that ultimately, to be able to have a borrower have a defense against eviction, this has to be done essentially at the state and local levels, protection. But again, if people can get information or cases where they believe this is happening to Fannie and Freddie, we do have a degree of moral suasion, if you will, that we can and have used.
Yeah, absolutely. That's helpful to know. And I'll continue to share with you and your staff stories as we hear them, because I certainly think that carries weight if Fannie and Freddie are reaching out to the owners to make them aware of the law. And I know we're almost out of time, but I just want to ask you a couple questions on forbearance, since it certainly looks like the clock is going to run out on the federal eviction moratoriums, at least for a period of time. And so the protections for renters in properties that have forbearance become even more important. So one, I think I heard you say that there are 170,000 multifamily units in properties with
currently in a
forbearance.
Fannie and Freddie forbearance. Yep.
Okay. And so how can tenants know that they are in properties where the owner has forbearance, and so they are then protected from eviction?
So the lookup tool for the multifamily should be able to tell them that. So the multifamily lookup tool should be able to tell you whether you're in a property or not. But again, because the requirements to be in forbearance, I mentioned all the things such as notification that the property owners would have a responsibility to tell them that. Well, let me go back and make sure. Let me get you a more solid answer on this, because my understanding is you should be able to tell from the lookup tool.
Yeah, I don't think you can. I think what you could tell from the lookup tool is that
whether it's a Bax property or not.
Yeah, exactly, but not whether the owner has requested and received forbearance. So that would be the piece that whether it's FHFA notifying tenants in writing that the property owner has sought and received a forbearance, or including that information in the public lookup tool. I think that will be really important for renters to know whether they are still protected from evictions.
Right. Well, I will take a look at that and see what we can add additionally there as a clarification.
Okay, great. Okay, well, I know we're out of time. We do have a few more questions that I'll ask that I can follow up with you afterwards to get answers and share that back out with participants. But as always, Mark, I really appreciate your time and your leadership, and I appreciate you joining the call.
Well, thank you, Diane, and really thank you for what you're doing, everybody on the call. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Take care.
Bye.
Okay, so now I think the next thing I'll do is go back to Kim and thank you, Kim Johnson, for your patience, and appreciate your willingness to stand by, but I want to give you a chance to finish your update on state and local implementation. And then after Kim, we'll turn to our field updates.
No problem at all. Thanks so much for turning it back over. And it was a good segue. So to carry on with the kind of conversation about where eviction moratoria stand, the USDA has extended its eviction and foreclosure moratorium for borrowers with USDA single-family housing through August 31st. And we are pushing HUD to take similar action and extend their moratorium on HUD-assisted housing as well. State and local governments have also been using their CARES Act funding to establish emergency rental assistance funds that help ensure low-income households can remain safely and stably housed throughout the pandemic. However, like Diane said at the top of the call, these funds are often in high demand and run out very quickly, indicating a need for increased funding specifically targeted to the provision of rental assistance and the necessity of a multi-pronged approach to preventing evictions. As we talked about with Hunter Kurtz, HUD recently released an eviction prevention and stability toolkit to help public housing authorities and housing choice voucher landlords work with tenants to avoid eviction. Additionally, the National Housing Law Project has come out with numerous resources to help tenants know their rights under CARES Act moratoria and to help advocates bring legal challenges to eviction proceedings. We love hearing from you all about the successes that you've experienced and are doing our best to help address any questions or issues that advocates are running up against. If you'd like to join our state and local implementation calls, they are Wednesdays at 3 p.m. Eastern. You can register for them on our website. Thanks, and that's all I have. So I'll hand it back over to you, Diane.
Okay, thanks very much, Kim. All right, we're going to turn now to hear field updates. And our first is from Christine Hess from Nevada Housing Coalition. And Christine, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, thank you so much, Diane. And a special thanks to all the NLIHC team. The Nevada Housing Coalition is a statewide nonprofit to advance and promote affordable housing options in Nevada. As most on this call are aware, Nevada has unfortunately had the highest unemployment rates in the country for both April and May at 30% and 25% respectively. This economic damage is impacting Nevadans in some of our key service industries where we also find some of the greatest need for affordable housing and housing security. So Nevada's efforts to address the housing insecurity faced by so many in this pandemic has been a team effort. The Nevada Housing Coalition is just one of the team members, and this afternoon I will share with you our connector role in particular. Thankfully, Diane, Nevada is not one of the 29 states whose governors have let their moratoriums on evictions and foreclosures expire. At the end of June, just 1 week before the Nevada moratorium was set to expire, Nevada Governor Steve Sisolak signed Emergency Directive 25 to bring needed relief through policy and resources. Directive 25 extended our moratorium until September 1st. Along with Nevada Attorney General Aaron Ford and our Nevada Legal Aid and other partners, this has brought at least a little breathing room for the other critical component of the emergency directive, standing up statewide emergency rental assistance. As part of Directive 25, Governor Sisolak designated $30 million of Nevada's coronavirus relief funds to emergency rental assistance. This effort was led in large part by our Nevada Treasurer, Zach Conine and his team. Like many of the organizations on this call, we, the Nevada Housing Coalition, are not the decision makers, and we don't hold the purse strings. But this also presents us with a unique role, and in this case, it was as a connector. So I'm briefly going to highlight 3 activities that supported our role as connector. First, we collected and distributed information, data research, timely and intentionally to our active partners. We provided our own research in partnership with the Gwynn Center, which is a policy and research institute here in Nevada, and we definitely leveraged a significant amount of the information and research from NLIHC, so thank you very much, team. We also listened, second, we listened for gaps and opportunities, and we learned from others through calls like this, but we also hosted our own statewide conversations and webinars to just really provide timely updates and insights and allow for opportunities to share, especially in the time of the pandemic when we're all working remotely. Finally, we actively engaged. We're part of the Clark County Housing Recovery Team, which Clark County is also home to Las Vegas, and they themselves have designated $30 million of their coronavirus relief fund allocation towards emergency housing assistance. We communicated regularly with critical partners like the Housing Division, our State Economic Development, the Nevada Homeless Alliance, and other key members, and then especially the Nevada Treasurer's Office. We also wrote a letter to our governor recommending $50 million, which we did get 30 million, which is a huge win, of our coronavirus relief funds to be used for housing assistance. And we also urged collaboration and coordination. So this brings me to the connection component that the Nevada Housing Coalition played. And really it was through relationships and trusted relationships. All of these activities set the stage for the coalition to connect Clark County and the state, both the Treasurer's Office and the Nevada Housing Division. And, you know, they're the ones who make the decisions. They are actively moving forward and coordinating across eligibility requirements, and providing the administration and distribution of these resources that'll work the best for those in needs. These programs should roll out very soon, maybe even this week. So that's my quick update. I was trying to be brief, but I can also answer any questions, Diane, if you had any.
That's really helpful, Christine, and great work. Thank you for your leadership and getting that extended eviction moratorium and getting those funds made available for emergency rental assistance. When did you say the eviction moratorium is extended until?
Until September 1st.
Okay. And a question, and you may have answered this, but what are the funds that are being used for the emergency rental assistance?
Sure. So at a statewide level, there is $30 million of our state's coronavirus relief funds. So, and then at the county level, Clark County also received an allocation of coronavirus relief funds with its population, and they designated $30 million towards the financial assistance.
Got it. So coronavirus relief funds for both. That's helpful.
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. Well, thank you so much, Christina. Really appreciate your good work and appreciate you being on the call today to share.
Thanks so much.
All right, we'll turn now to our next field update, which comes from Allison McIntosh from Oregon Housing Alliance. Allison, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Diane. And thank you so much for having me on the call today. My name is Allison McIntosh. I work for the Oregon Housing Alliance, which is a state advocacy coalition that believes every Oregonian should have a safe, stable, and affordable place to call home. First, I really want to echo what Christine said and just express my huge thanks to the National Low-Income Housing Coalition. I have found these calls to be so valuable every Monday to hear from our partners. But also the data and the research and the technical assistance and the support that you all provide has been really amazing and just incredibly critical to our work here in Oregon. So thank you. I'm going to talk a little bit today about what we were just able to accomplish. We had a special session of our legislature meet at the end of June, and we were able to extend our eviction moratorium, enact a state foreclosure moratorium, and institute a repayment period for folks who rent their homes. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Our legislature has been out of session since early March. They only meet for 5 weeks in even numbered years. And since that time, since the coronavirus hit, we've had we've had a coronavirus response committee of the legislature that has been meeting, as well as some hearings of regular housing committees. And at every opportunity, we have taken we've raised the issue of really needing a strong eviction moratorium and better protections for folks who rent their homes during this pandemic, and really emphasized that housing stability is really key during this pandemic. We need a place for folks to be able to stay at home. We were successful in getting some rent assistance money, which I think other folks from Oregon have talked about previously in this call. We were successful in getting a little bit of general fund, some coronavirus relief funds, as well as some community development block grant dollars. Our governor did issue an executive order in late March, early April that was a state eviction moratorium that protected all tenants. It stopped the filing of and the giving of eviction notices to tenants, and also prevented late fees. That order was set to expire on June 30th. Early on in the pandemic as well, our largest county in the state, Multnomah County, which is where Portland is, kind of mirrored the governor's executive order on evictions and also instituted a repayment period, a 6-month repayment period, where after the moratorium on evictions ended, tenants would have the ability to pay any back rent that was due during the moratorium in that 6 months. Really in recognition that if folks have not been working, there's no way that they will be able to just suddenly pay all of the back rent that they owe when the moratorium ends. And that was something that we really seized on and tried to take statewide and ask the legislature to implement that for all tenants in Oregon. Particularly as we got close to the end of the eviction moratorium, our message was really that we needed a state eviction moratorium. Folks were not able to be back at work right now and would not be able to pay rent. And we also needed that 6-month repayment period so that folks would have time to either access rent assistance or get back on their feet and be able to pay any back rent. And that was something we had many legislators who have been working with us to distribute, both to secure and distribute rent assistance. And we really have been talking a lot about that need to get rent assistance out the door and how horrible it would be to have folks who finally were able to get access to rent assistance, but it came too late to save them. We put together, as always, a really broad coalition. I can't say enough about the work and support we had from our legal aid attorneys. We also had our labor unions, our League of Oregon Cities, the food bank, tenants, rent assistance providers, as well as local jurisdictions who were really all carrying this single message about the need for a strong eviction moratorium, a repayment period, and a foreclosure moratorium. We also had really key legislative champions. And in the 1-week special session in late June, right before the governor's eviction moratorium was set to expire, we did secure that victory. So now we have an eviction moratorium in place until September 30th. It also prohibits late fees. It also includes a prohibition on landlords reporting late rent payments to credit bureaus. 6-month repayment period will begin October 1st and will go until March of 2021. Really key also to this was having tenants speak directly to their legislators. Here in Oregon, we actually have a number of folks who are still unfortunately waiting for their unemployment insurance benefits to come through because of our really outdated systems. And that was really both tragic and also helped us make sure that we could extend the eviction moratorium. And I just want to say, as I wrap it up, that we know that this isn't enough, that we really need massive amounts of rent assistance and rent relief for folks who aren't able to pay that back rent, and urgent and critical work that we're going to be doing until the eviction moratorium expires now at the end of September. So thank you so much for having me today.
Allison, thank you so much for joining and sharing that really helpful report. And thanks for your great work and congratulations, really important progress. And I think you're sharing sort of the keys to your success around having the singular message and these important partnerships is really helpful to other states as they are trying to get their governors to do the same and extend these eviction moratoriums. So thank you very much, Allison. So our next field update comes from Puerto Rico. And I'll turn now to Francisco Rodriguez Fraticelli from the Coalición de Coaliciones in Puerto Rico. Francisco, please go ahead.
Yes, good afternoon to everybody. Thank you for having me this afternoon, this call. For quite a while, I haven't been participating in this call, even though I've been listening to all of them. But my report today is basically about the situation after a few little things after the seismic activity in southern Puerto Rico. We started working with the isolation related to COVID-19. We started negotiating because in Puerto Rico, and somehow we have to negotiate with the government leaders to get the testing for the homeless population in the street, the unsheltered population in the street, but they refuse to do it because supposedly they don't have the resources for that. Even though the news and everybody knows that the government of Puerto Rico has been receiving a lot of funding in relation to COVID-19, some money that we are not getting into at this point. I don't know how much you know nationally that in Puerto Rico we are going through this situation of governance with our government leaders that are putting the financial situation and in the middle of COVID very hard for us at the community level. We are still struggling with the funding with the CDBG DR, and now we are struggling with the funding from COVID. The government of Puerto Rico, at least in terms of housing from CPD programs from HUTS. CPD program, Puerto Rico was allocated for $84.6 million in CDBG, regular CDBG and ESG funding. That our big struggle at this moment is to try to that the government uses properly this funding to house homeless people in the middle of COVID. But with the fact that they are not providing testing for unsheltered homeless people in Puerto Rico, Coalición de Coaliciones is leading with several universities and research centers, an initiative to start with Médicos Sin Fronteras that are servicing in Puerto Rico recently, a couple of private foundations. We are trying to get the testing to the streets to find out and try to use that as a tool to house people with this ESG funding in Puerto Rico. So basically, this is what we haven't received even no assistance whatsoever, and no shelter has been identified to shelter positive COVID persons in the streets. The government talking about what you've been talking before about this mortgage situation in Puerto Rico. There's no such thing as this mortgage, so they finish and they're not going and discussing it anymore. So for the moment, this is what I have to report from Puerto Rico.
Well, thank you, Francisco. It's good to hear your voice again. It's been a little while, and I appreciate all the hard work that you're doing. I appreciate you joining the call, and certainly there's so much still to be done in Puerto Rico, and we are behind you and with you, and we'll continue working with you to try to get these issues solved. So thank you, Francisco.
Thank you.
So I'll talk in a minute about some of the other calls that we have every week, the working group calls, to sort of dig into some of the big challenges that are raised on these national calls, including a working group on issues in Puerto Rico. But first I want to turn to where I started, which is the urgency of congressional action and what we all need to do in these next few weeks before the window closes to get Congress to act. So I'm going to turn to Sarah Sadian first, our VP of Public Policy at NLIHC, for an update from Capitol Hill. Sarah, please go ahead. Sarah, are you there? You might be on mute. Okay, maybe we're having a technical difficulty. Hang on just one second.
I think we're all good now. Is that better? Can you hear me now?
Yes, now I got you, Sarah. Go ahead.
Great. Sorry about that. So this week, the House and Senate are on recess, and what we've heard is that Republican staffers are working now on their proposal for the next COVID relief package. There aren't a ton of details available right now, but we've heard that Republicans plan to meet early next week, likely on Tuesday, to try to sort out some differences among them about what the bill should include and how large it should be. So far, there's been a lot of focus on unemployment insurance, stimulus checks, protections for businesses, and some state and local money as states reopen their economies. And we haven't heard as much details about whether or not rental assistance will be included. We'll know for certain, hopefully by mid to late next week, when the Republicans plan to unveil their proposal after they hash out their differences earlier in the week. So that gives us a short period of time this week and early next week to try to influence that Republican proposal and to encourage them to include emergency rental assistance and other protections for renters and people experiencing homelessness. We've been sharing news articles and op-eds from their states, as well as information from the Census Bureau Snapshot tool, which shows on a weekly basis the number of people who are housing insecure. I'll share a link to that tool in the chat box because I think it's really helpful when you're engaging with your members of Congress. Like I said, it's unclear if they're going to include emergency rental assistance or not, but we are starting to hear some more talk from Republican senators and their staff about what their focus would be if rental assistance is included. So they are focusing a lot on the liquidity fund that was included in the HEROES Act. This is assistance that would be given from the Federal Reserve to mostly large landlords. They're talking a lot about how to narrowly define rental assistance so that eligibility is very narrow, and we're worried that that might leave out, millions of households who were already struggling before the pandemic and who are now facing evictions and homelessness. And we're hearing increasingly that they might include language that would exclude undocumented people and their families from receiving assistance. But like I said, we'll see next week when they unveil their plan exactly whether it includes rental assistance and what sorts of restrictions that would be in place that we would need to work collectively to address. When they release the bill, we'll start to see more negotiations going on in earnest between Democrats and Republicans. From what we've heard, there really hasn't been much conversation yet between both parties about what this eventual bill would look like. That means that when the Senate and House come back next Monday, they're going to have a really short window of time to get anything done. And that's because only a few days after they come back, a week or so after they get back, the House is scheduled to go on recess on July 31st. So unless they extend their recess further, they'll have 2 working business weeks alone for them to hash out their differences and pass a bill in the House and the Senate. So if you haven't touched base with your members of Congress this week, I encourage you to reach out again, share updated information with them, share stories about people who need rental assistance in their communities. It's really important that we're continuing to put pressure on them and demand that they're addressing this issue in the next bill. I'll say a little bit more about the rental assistance bill that we're pushing and who our targets are. We're still trying to get all Democratic senators onto the Emergency Rental Assistance and Rental Market Stabilization Act. And so far, we have not seen any movement from Warner from Virginia, Cantwell from Washington, Carper from Delaware, Tester from Montana, Jones from Alabama, and Manchin from West Virginia. So please continue to reach out to their offices. It's really critically important that we have as many senators as possible on this bill. And I'll share a link to the fact sheet and our current list of co-sponsors for you to check out. Our Republican targets remain the same too. We're doing a lot of emphasis on Senator Collins from Maine, Crapo from Idaho. Both of those are the chair of different committees that oversee programs at HUD and USDA. They're critically important here. And there's a number of Republicans either who have taken a stance on housing before or who are in tough re-elections that we want you to focus on too. And I'll share the list of these in the chat box soon too. That's Portman from Ohio, Young from Indiana, McSally from Arizona, Romney from Utah, Gardner from Colorado, and Tillis from North Carolina. So these are folks that we think we can put enough pressure on for them to be weighing in with their Republican leadership about the need for emergency rental assistance. So with that, I'll turn it over back to you, Diane. I know that Joey will talk about ways that people can be involved in the next coming weeks.
Yeah, very good. Thanks, Sarah. Joey, I'll turn it right to you, to Joey Lindstrom, who's our Director of Field Organizing, to talk about some specific actions all of you can take to help us get these policies across the finish line. Joey, please go ahead.
Hey, thanks, Diane, and thanks to all of you who are joining the call today. This is a really important moment that we are in right now. If any of you have been waiting for the right, most dramatic time to reach out to your senators, this is it. We really need people setting up as many meetings as possible with senators, especially Republican senators, but the Democrats as well, because as Sarah just indicated, the Senate is likely to start moving on their spending package of the coronavirus in the coming weeks to try to build some momentum and to bring our various efforts under one umbrella. NLIHC, along with our various partners in this work and our partners from the Opportunity Starts at Home campaign and the Disaster Housing Recovery Coalition, we are hosting a virtual lobby day on July 21st, which is 1 week from tomorrow. We have in our toolkit, which was excellently put together by Tori and Brooke and Emma on the field team, and very notably by Sarah on the policy team. We have a lot of really wonderful talking points to make it really easy for any of you to prepare for such a meeting. But we also have some really helpful logistical fact sheets in there. And when I say logistical, I'm talking about tips on how to request a meeting. There's a sample email that you can send to offices requesting a meeting. We also have some tips on holding a good virtual lobby day. We have some sample tweets that can be used through our social media toolkit that will emphasize some of the asks that you've made, and will make representatives and senators more aware that you didn't just ask them for their support, but people in the Twitter sphere know that these concerns were brought to them and that their leadership is specifically being called for. So we have a lot of really helpful tools in that toolkit. We're trying to make it as easy as possible for any of you to participate. We have had some success getting hundreds and hundreds of organizations signed on to these sign-on letters. I say letters plural because we're asking both for $100 billion in emergency rental assistance, which is our top priority ask. And then we have another sign-on letter that's for all of the key asks that we are moving forward with in the coronavirus spending package. So we have more than 800 organizations rather, on the first letter for emergency rental assistance, and more than 600 on the broader letter. Please add your organizations today. And while sign-on letters are really important and a simple way to be counted as the growing crescendo of organizations and advocates throughout the country who want to see $100 billion in rent assistance, a comprehensive nationwide eviction moratorium, $11.5 billion in emergency solutions grant funding, $13 billion in emergency funding to other housing programs, including 100,000 emergency housing vouchers. For those of you who are calling for these changes, being on the sign-on letter is excellent, but setting up a meeting with congressional staffers is so much better. So if you haven't seen the toolkit yet, we'll include it, of course, in the email that we send out every Monday. That is a wrap-up and a recap of this very call. And take a look at that toolkit. And if you have any questions, please be in touch with myself or Tori or Brooke or Kyle, any of us on the field team. And we really want to make it as easy as possible for you to participate. So July 21st, don't miss it. But as I said last week, if you reach out to a congressional office and you're told that July 21st doesn't work for them, but you should set up a meeting for another day, definitely take that meeting on that other day. What we are eager to hear from you is what staffers and members of Congress are telling you when you make these asks. We've also set up a report back form for all of your meetings where you can simply fill out how members of Congress or their staff responded to our specific asks, and we can gather that data, and that can inform our further engagement on Capitol Hill. Thanks, Diane.
Excellent, thank you, Joey. And now I'm going to turn it to Lisa Marlowe, who is NLIHC's Manager of Media Relations and Communications, to talk about still more that you can and should be doing over the next couple of weeks. She'll talk about some communications updates, tools, and tactics. Lisa, please go ahead.
Hi, Diane. Thank you so much. As Diane mentioned at the beginning of today's call, the Out of Reach report will be launched tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So Out of Reach is NLIHC's annual report that compares renters' wages and the cost of housing in every state, county, and metropolitan area. Each year, the report concludes that rents are out of reach for millions of Americans. This year, the report is especially poignant because it outlines the underlying historic underinvestment and disinvestment of housing programs and resources that have contributed to the wave of evictions and increase in homelessness that we're currently seeing today. Even before the pandemic, more than 211,000 people in the U.S. were experiencing homelessness on sidewalks or other unsheltered locations. Another 356,000 people were experiencing homelessness in emergency shelters with limited ability to self-isolate. These people faced a higher risk of becoming ill and spreading the virus to their friends and family. The economic downturn spurred by the virus further increased the risk of housing instability for millions of low-wage renters at a time when stably housing is vital. The Out of Reach report reviewed in detail how low-wage workers have been struggling to afford their homes for decades, regardless of the state of the economy, and provides evidence that housing should not be conditional on one's wages or work status. This report is a tool we can use to make the case for strong housing provisions and resources in the next emergency coronavirus bill. We encourage you to share this resource with the members of Congress who have committed publicly to trying to stem the tide of evictions by supporting and introducing legislation like the Emergency Rental Assistance and Rental Market Stabilization Act, or the Protecting Renters from Evictions and Fees Act, recently introduced by Senator Warren. Thank these members for their support and encourage them to share this resource with their colleagues as an example of why they've supported investments in housing. Alternatively, please share this report with members of Congress who have not supported publicly legislation that would provide rent relief now for millions of struggling Americans. Ask them if they're familiar with the report and the widespread impact unaffordable housing costs has on their constituents and the country. Share graphs and tables from this report that break down data such as the number of occupations in the U.S. that paid less than the housing wage, or the comparisons between how much a person in the 10th percentile wage makes an hour versus the housing wage needed to afford a 2 or 1 bedroom home. You can share this information on social media, and as I believe been mentioned before, tag members of Congress, or during your virtual lobby day visit that Joey just talked about. And also, too, if you can't participate in a lobby day visit, or if you haven't been able to schedule one, you can also use this opportunity to call your members of Congress and share information from the Outreach report with their staffers over the phone. On July 7th, PBS NewsHour interviewed Diane, Dr. Megan Sandel, Laverne Edmonds, and other housing advocates for a piece on the consequences of the rise in evictions during a time when staying at home was a requirement by public health officials. The piece also featured an interview with South Carolina resident Rhonda Anderson, who, despite working more than 75 hours a week to keep her family in a home, she and her family were evicted. Rhonda's husband lost his job because of the pandemic, and she became the sole income for her household. This income was coming from a low-wage job. Outreach asked us, how much do we need to earn and work to afford a modest home in our state? Rhonda needed to work even more than 75 hours a week to stay in her home. Is this sustainable? We say no, and that's why in the report and in our message to Congress, we've outlined the solutions that have been shared by Diane at the beginning of this call and Joey again just now, that include the $100 billion emergency rental assistance, the National Uniform Moratorium on Evictions, and so on. So please continue to share these resources on social media using the hashtag #RentReliefNow. Share with members of Congress to stress that inaction has consequences, and share with your network to prove that there are solutions available, but we can't address the enduring problem of housing unaffordability without bold federal intervention and investments. So lastly, I just want to conclude by just saying again that the 2020 Outreach report will be available at nliac.org/OOR tomorrow, July 14th, after 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time. So feel free, please check it out, share, and let us know if you have any questions about the report. And that's all I have, Diane.
Excellent, Lisa. Thank you so much. And thanks to everybody who spoke on today's call and made really clear that there is, while the time is running short, there's so much that each of us can do each and every day over the next few weeks until this final bill is passed to make sure that the resources and protections renters need are included. So please do take advantage of these opportunities to keep making the case. And just very quickly want to mention as next steps, I believe many of you have been participating in our other weekly working group calls, but just to be sure that you know about them, in addition to these larger national weekly calls, we have every Tuesday at 12:30 legislative working group calls. Those are led by Sarah Sadian and Joey Lindstrom, and cover the details about what's happening from Capitol Hill and tactics to advance our policy priorities. On Tuesdays at 3, we have a Working with FEMA working group. That's every other week, and that's led by NLIHC's Noah Patton. On Wednesdays every week, we have a state and local implementation working group call led by Kim Johnson and Tori Bure from NLIHC. We have a bi-weekly Puerto Rico recovery call that is led by our partners in Puerto Rico and assisted by Noah Patton. And every other Monday evening at 6 p.m., we have Tenant Talk, which is a call for low-income renters, and that is led by Renee Willis and Kyle Arbuckle. And you are all welcome to join any or all of those calls. The link to register for those calls I see now is in the chat box, and you can find it on our website, and we'll include it in email follow-ups. And as always, feel free to reach out to me or anybody at NLIHC to find out more about the calls or the materials that we have, or any additional questions or resource needs that you have. So thank you all so much for joining today's call. Thanks for your good work. Please keep it up, and we'll talk again soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.